Hi, my name is Krista Lee, creative producer here at the Candler Foundry and the proud host of the Candler in Conversation podcast. I'm so excited for this partnership that we've done with the Doctor of Ministry program for this series on chaplaincy. We hope that these episodes not only inspire you to learn more about chaplaincy, but they also encourage you to serve communities locally and globally. And now it's time for the episode with our guest host, Dr. Roger Nam.
I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Danielle Hansen to this episode. Dr. Hansen came to Candler in 2021, and I came in 2020, so we've been kind of friends. And if you actually look at our text chain, you'll see topics like Taylor Swift and cheese and gochujang chips and airline miles and things like that. But I've never really had a chance to talk about her scholarship and her teaching. So I'm excited to have this conversation with Dr. Danielle Hansen. So welcome, Danielle, to this episode.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's start by telling us your official title and some of the classes you teach at Candler.
Sure. So I am the Associate Professor for Practical Theology and Spiritual Care. And I also am the director of the Chaplaincy program. So I teach Intro to Chaplaincy pretty regularly. And I also will teach pastoral care classes like Introduction to Pastoral Care or Trauma and Theology. And as part of the DMIN program, I will also be teaching a class on trauma-informed spiritual care.
And so you have a very broad background. You have degrees from Yale and Boston University, where you studied with Shelley Rambo. You were a parish priest for some time. You also were a school chaplain. So how do you put all these experiences into your current role directing the chaplaincy programs?
So I think that anyone who is going into any kind of ministerial role is doing something that is both intuitive and requires practical skills. And so I think the more experience of ministry you can get, the more you get to know about people and the more you can develop those practical skills. And the more time that you have to invest in your education, to continue to develop those self-reflexivity skills, that helps you know yourself more and your own sense of calling. So for me, that breadth of experience, being a parish priest, being in a school chaplaincy role, I've also served in healthcare chaplaincy roles, being an adjunct, working full-time in a university like Emory. But before this, I was in a denominational seminary. All of those experiences, I think, have helped me to know my own sense of calling, but have also helped me to see the kinds of skills that students need to succeed in whatever their calling in ministry is.
Right. So what are some of the different chaplaincy roles that students get upon graduation?
So I see an increasing number of students seeking out chaplaincy because it gives them the spaciousness to do something different. And I see this yearning for wanting to be involved in people's spiritual lives, to make a difference in the core things that matter to human beings outside of the kinds of ministries they've heard of in the past.
Right.
So I see students going into healthcare chaplaincy in hospitals, but also in senior centers or community centers. I also see students embarking on prison ministry in the federal prison system or the state prison system. There's also a growing number of students who want to do social movement chaplaincy, which is a kind of chaplaincy where students are involved in justice movements of some sort. Oftentimes, they'll pair that with parish ministry or some kind of other ministerial role that has a really heartier salary than social movement chaplaincy often currently has. Corporate chaplaincy has also been on the rise in student interest. Yeah, there are a large number of organizations that are looking for chaplains for a variety of reasons in the corporate world, and that's an area that's really growing. And I also see students seeking out entrepreneurial opportunities. So, and school and higher education chaplains.
Okay.
So, things that we once thought of as the core of chaplaincy,
Right.
like healthcare chaplaincy,
Right.
school and higher education chaplaincy.
And military.
And military. Yeah. Students are doing all of those things. And they're also doing these other things that we haven't usually associated with being places where chaplains show up, and now they are.
Right. So suppose I'm a student and I come to Candler wanting to do congregational parish ministry, and then I feel sort of a draw to use the word spaciousness. And I completely understand that's a very generous term that you're using with spaciousness. I walk into your office like, Dr. Hansen, I want to become a chaplain. What kind of chaplain should I be? Like all these options, how do you steer students to kind of find their vocational call within this wide array of possibilities as a chaplain?
Right. So the thing I don't do is give them an answer.
Right. Good. Very good professor. Too.
I mean, it would make it easier or quicker for everyone involved, right. But I don't think it would be as satisfying for the student who has to go out and live that calling. So, in my own journey, the journey to ministry was very intuitive, and it was a process of finding the right conversation partners and asking sometimes the wrong question and sometimes the right question, but sometimes you have to ask the wrong question to get to the right question. But giving yourself time to have those conversations with yourself and with other people who are interested in spirituality the same way you are. And this is what I think theological education offers. It offers a chance to have that time to make those questions your primary purpose.
Right.
And so when you start doing that, you start to hear yourself better and hear more fully where your sense of call meets the needs in the world. Okay. So what I tell students is to, look for those conversation partners, find those classes, ask the wrong question, ask the right one. Try out a form of chaplaincy and see how it feels. Right. And if it doesn't feel right, you can try something else. So that's how those conversations tend to go.
I guess we're both examples. You had so many different chaplaincy experiences. I was an analyst and I was a congregational pastor and I did all these different things. And I think those experiences are really critical in honing our vocational identity, which continues to be honed, in mid-career and senior career as well. What makes a good chaplain? And if you could speak in contrast to a parish minister, like what are some of the skills that you need to hone and sharpen as a potential chaplain?
So in a lot of ways, the skills intersect. The way I describe it is it's like a Venn diagram.
Right.
So there are some skills that are unique to chaplaincy, some skills that are unique to parish ministry, and then actually a really wide amount in the middle that intersect. So some of the skills that are shared in common are the process of thinking about what your beliefs are and realizing why you hold those beliefs. So a lot of times people have a set of what my colleague Carrie Dorian calls embedded beliefs, beliefs that we've grown up with, that we assume are just kind of the way things are. And they're an embedded belief because you don't really think about them. So it becomes a little hard to figure out what they are if you're not really thinking about them. But developing an awareness of those beliefs, those assumptions you had about the world, and then figuring out whether that's actually what you want to hold on to.
Okay. I'm totally familiar with embedded beliefs. I just didn't have a term because I teach Bible at Candler, so I'm completely familiar with that term, but that's a helpful thing.
I think it comes up in Bible a lot.
Yeah.
I remember in my own Bible class, that was actually the place that came up the most, where students, I remember in my Bible class, got really suddenly shocked and surprised when they realized their view wasn't everyone's view. And we have that with our theology all the time, beliefs that we assume everyone has, and then it turns out they don't all share that. So being aware of those beliefs and then shifting to that awareness, and maybe you keep those beliefs, maybe you don't, but to know that they're conscious, to understand this is what I hold dear. This is what Carrie Dorian calls deliberative beliefs. Okay. So you really want to know who you are as a person of faith, what your spirituality is, why it is the way it is.
Right.
And that's important because when you're working with someone else, they're not you. That seems like a really obvious thing to say,
right.
but it comes up in chaplaincy and parish ministry
Got it.
all the
Yeah.
time. So that process of knowing who you are so that you don't impose that on other people becomes important. But at the same time, what you do need to do is to be able to empathize, to meet that other person where they are. So listening skills wind up being incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to empathize is incredibly important. Building awareness of how people project upon you is really important. And to see that just as you might project upon someone else, they also are going to come to an interaction with you with assumptions about who you are based on their prior experiences of belief. And they won't have gone through this process that you've had. They won't have had this time that you've
And they could be in crisis too, so they don't have the space to go through it. Okay.
So all of those skills are important. In addition to that, outside of a parish context, if you're working in an environment, as most chaplains are, that is very diverse, religiously speaking, you need a strong familiarity with other worldviews and understanding of what those worldviews are so that you can meet people where they are. And I think that the other thing that you need is an understanding of organizations.
Okay.
So if you're in a parish, you're in a primarily religious organization. If you're working in a corporate environment, in a school, in a healthcare environment, the goal of those organizations is not faith-based. The goal isn't to increase someone's spirituality. It's to send, someone home from the hospital well, or to help them graduate to go to college, or for them to leave the prison system. Whatever.
For a corporation, I could think how big of a difference. Like the corporation, the purpose is to make money. But a smart chaplain, a wise chaplain, will work within that system to provide care because there's evidence that spiritual care actually helps people be more effective. But I think, it's a very different, just stated goal of a corporation compared to a parish.
Absolutely. So understanding how organizations work and then understanding what it means to hold your own as a person of faith while really being able to be part of that other world so that you can make a difference in that other world is incredibly important.
That's super helpful. I want to turn to our doctor ministry program. We are launching this fall this new chaplaincy track. From the start, it is our biggest track. There's so much demand for this track. And so ideally, these students that are coming in will have several years of chaplaincy experience that they'll bring to them to their doctoral studies. What do you hope these students will gain in their 3 years of doctoral work here at Candler?
So my doctoral advisor was fond of saying the process of getting a doctorate is the process of the student becoming the teacher. And I think that's a wonderful way of explaining what I hope this DMin will do for students. So chaplaincy students who are coming into this program are already coming in with a breadth of experience and they want to take this next step to be leaders in their field. Chaplaincy is growing so much and it's becoming so much more robust that the field really needs those leaders. And so my hope for students is that this degree will give them the time and the opportunity and the resources and exposure to, to what's out there for them to take that step from being the student to the teacher, to the expert and leader in the field of chaplaincy in the way that they feel called to be.
That sounds so positive to me because the student body that we see is actually very diverse in their chaplaincy context. We have, of course, medical, hospital, but a lot of campus chaplains of very different faiths. We have quite a few that work with incarcerated populations. And so it's going to be a really great cohort where they can actually be the teacher for each other and maybe galvanize new ways of thinking about their own ministry through chaplaincy. I want to turn a little bit to your scholarship. You have a book that just came out this year, a very bold and courageous book titled Speaking of Rape, in which you address and put forth ideas of articulating sexual violence in ways that may be more helpful for healing and restoration. I really want to congratulate you for articulating this and writing this, but more for this, our chaplaincy audience. What are some takeaways that you discovered that might be helpful for chaplains to know about?
Sure. So the book is about sexual violence at some level, it's about trauma in general.
Right.
And trauma defies speech. That's one thing
Sure.
that trauma experts tend to agree upon. My book talks about one subset of trauma, and it talks about the reason why that subset defies speech.
Mm-hmm.
And my proposal is that there are two reasons for it. One is that sexual violence is a form of trauma, and so speaking about it is hard because the brain isn't wired for speech and trauma, and because the words that we have been constructed in a way that leaves a lot of people out for various reasons. So it talks about why those two things, especially the social construction part, are really a problem. But it also talks about what people can do to be helpful. So what a chaplain can do to be helpful. So I spend a lot of time talking about what it means to listen well.
Okay.
And, to listen to those gaps in language, why those gaps are there, how to overcome those linguistic barriers, and then also talk about how we seek out justice, given that this is so hard to talk about. So I hope that actually the book, while it's focusing on that one form of trauma, does more broadly give some tools for chaplains to use to help people who are struggling speaking in general.
Sure. And the listening part from a very specific angle, I think, would be very, in all these contexts, whether school or hospital or incarcerated or corporate. You have a second book in 2024, which, by the way, is completely insane to publish 2 books in 1 year. But you have a second book called Trauma-Informed Spiritual Care. And it's kind of a resource handbook. Can you give me one example of a tool of spiritual care that a chaplain might have they might not really think about necessarily? Just one example that might help them.
Sure. So that book draws upon the work of a woman named Judith Herman, who's a psychiatrist who has researched trauma. And Judith Herman talks about 3 stages of healing from trauma. The first is to create safety. The second is to do the work of meaning making. And the third is to do the work of reconnection. And when I teach students about trauma-informed care, one of the things that I tell them is that chaplains are often really drawn to the meaning making work, or religious care providers in general.
Right.
And a lot of times that's why they came to ministry, because meaning making was really important to them. And it's really important to the people they're serving also. I encourage my students, and I really encourage readers in the book, to pay attention to this first stage, which is the safety stage.
Right.
Because without that, that groundwork laid, that safety laid, it's very hard to do the meaning making work. So I propose that there are a variety of ways to do this, that safety isn't just physical safety, it's also psychological safety, and it's cognitive safety, and it's spiritual safety. So one thing that the chaplains can really do is to provide those safety resources. And sometimes they are very practical, getting someone safe housing, getting them enough food to eat, getting them clothes.
Right.
But it's also, showing that the spiritual questions they're asking, the spiritual fears they have, are not going to destroy them, that they're worth airing out, that they're worth hearing, that they're okay to have, and that they're welcomed to be raised to the chaplain. And so doing that safety work then allows the meaning making and reconnection.
What does reconnection look like? What does that look like in these contexts?
There are 2 parts to reconnection. There's reconnection with oneself, because a traumatic experience often involves a person feeling like the human being they were, the beliefs they had, the relationships they had, don't quite make sense anymore. And the self that they knew doesn't quite make sense anymore. So part of that reconnection is kind of owning the process you've been through and reconnecting with oneself. But it's also reconnecting with the community. So, in chaplaincy positions that are ongoing, like in a school, in a college, in the prison system, in the military, maybe a little less so in a hospital where people tend to come and go quickly. When you have these long-term relationships, you get to have a chance to really help that reconnection with the
Right.
community. So, that can involve everything from helping the person speak publicly about their experience to helping them connect with an organization where they'll do some kind of advocacy work. Maybe they write about the experience or, lead a support group, whatever it is, something where they're kind of owning that new self in the community where they are a part.
This is super helpful. I am grateful that you're at Candler for our students. And I'm grateful for us so we can have our Taylor Swift text going back and forth.
That's right.
I'm looking forward to continuing that.
Likewise, it's been great to be with you today and great to be with our students and to continue our text chain.
Thank you. This was so helpful. Thank you for these conversations. Thank you for these insights. In this short time, I learned so much. I feel so good for our students to get to learn with you.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much.